Good morning, everybody. Last time I spoke, we talked about Ishmael's trial, in which Ishmael and his mother Hagar were sent out from Abraham's house and into the desert. We talked about how Hagar wandered around in the desert, and when they ran out of water, she placed her son underneath a bush and walked away so she wouldn't have to see him die. Then we talked about how an angel of God came to her because he had heard Ishmael. And God opened her eyes to see that there was a well of water that was right next to her. She gathered some water for him, and he survived. Eventually, Hagar took an Egyptian wife for Ishmael, and that's where we left off last time, with Ishmael. Now, there's some more that happens in chapter 21, and it is important, but for right now, we're going to skip ahead to the next chapter. So we'll come back to the end of 21 if you've noticed in your Bible, and you're like, wait, there's like more stuff here. Why are we talking about 22? We'll get back there. But for now, just for the sake of time, I'll just kind of summarize it. Basically, like there's this really awkward time, right? Okay, so like Abraham and Ishmael have this like little awkward encounter, and it's like, okay, whose well is this, etc. We'll get there. But do you guys remember Abimelech? Like, that was the guy that is like, hey, Sarah's my sister. So it's all around just a very awkward situation. Again, we'll get there later. Okay. So today it says, after these things, God decided to test Abraham. So he comes to Abraham and he calls his name. And Abraham says, Hineni. Now, here we go. So he says, Hineni. I have a picture of what that word looks like. Now, this word means behold, and like we talked about this before. And if you remember, it also is like an expression of like emotion, like dude. Normally, it's an emphatic phrase, and it's used to express like a big emotion. But in this instance, it has another use. You see, in Hebrew, what in English might be whole words are often added as a letter or two to the end of the word. So in Hebrew, we have hine here, and then we have this e here. And the e comes from the word for me and I. So together, this word, it means like, look, me. So, in this case, like if you remember, there's not words like yes or no. And so this is basically, if somebody calls your name, you would say this. So Hineni is like, they translate it, here I am, but it basically means yes. So like, Nale, yes, hello, can I help you? That's the same, it's the same sort of idea. Also, just like Hineni in this text is actually kind of a marker of transitions from what we expect in the story. So we have this whole, let's go back to the verse, here we go. We've got, okay, after these things, okay, so then God comes to Abraham. And he's like, hey, yo, what's up? And Abraham's like, yeah. And then God, you expect, God's like, hey, I'm going to keep my promises to you. I'm going to bless your boy. And then God would explain some stuff and expand on the promises he's already given. And then we would hear about how Isaac got married, yada, 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 the end. But no, that's not what happens in this story. We have more drama. And this time, God is the one who starts the drama. You also see here, God tested. He tested Abraham. Well, what was the test? And who was the test for? So I want you to hold on to that question as we go and think about it as we go along. So here comes the beginning of today's trouble. In Hebrew, God really piles on the words, and he takes his time getting to the point. He says, take your son, your only son, not really his only son, but legally his only son, because last time we talked about how he disowned Ishmael. But anyway, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and then go to the land of Moriah. Now, remember how I talked about how you can add me to the end of words? You can also add you to the end of words. So all these words are like, they have the word like son, and then it's attached to your son. So it just piles on over and over and over again. And then the author also focuses on familial words like son and only son. The effect is it slows you down when you read the text. God could have been like, take Isaac and go, or even just take your son, and Abraham would have figured out who it was that God was talking about. But I want you to notice the whole story is going to be filled with familial words, even when they really don't need to be there. So words like father and son, you're going to see it a lot. So it's like, take your son, your only son, the one who you love. Yeah, that one, Isaac. So just kind of, the author conveys these emotional, familial words that Abraham didn't walk through this story in a disimpassioned way. He's not like a robot just going through all this, like the emotions. Instead, the author keeps reminding us of this precious relationship that Abraham has with his son by continually using all these tender words to subtly express the emotions that are the undercurrent and driving force of our story. Right at the core of the story is this one simple truth. This is about the son that Abraham loves. Okay, so far so good. Abraham's tracking, probably nodding his head, maybe a little confused, like, why are you being so specific that it's Isaac? I wasn't confused. Then God says, go up to land of Moriah. Okay, got it. Go up there, which is the phrase that's used here, but it's actually translated and offer him up. There's a reason for that, because the word could mean go up, or it could be referring to offering a sacrifice, just like Stephen spoke about last week, where the smoke goes up. So Abraham, he's probably like, oh, go to land of Moriah and go up. Yeah, there are mountains there. And then all of a sudden, it's like, and then make him a burnt offering. And at that point, it's very clear what God is meaning. And so he would have to backtrack and be like, oh, he didn't mean go up the mountain. He meant offer him up as a burnt offering. Also, just so you know, a whole burnt offering means there's nothing from the offering that does not go into and is not consumed by the fire. This is the whole enchilada. There's no escaping this. Everything is burnt as an offering. Okay, our whole journey, this whole time with Abraham, has circled around the one question: who will be Abraham's heir? And now God says, okay, take your heir, kill him, and give him to me as a burnt offering. Wait, what? What? God's the one that puts the heir in jeopardy now? Also, quick translation fact. In this word, or in this verse, there's a word which could have a few different meanings. Just like the word in English, run, can mean a few things. You can run to the store, or run for president, or run a race. In Hebrew, the word na can mean now, or it can be a polite marker to say that you're asking a request. Like in English, you could say please. So it could mean both now or please. So it could be, please take your son and offer him up as a burnt offering. But some translators also say, now take your son. And English translators are divided on what this little word means. So just want to keep that in your mind. I don't think it means both, but just see maybe as we go through what if it's now or please. Was it more of a request, or was it more of a command? In context, it's actually unclear. Okay, child sacrifice. We got to talk about it, because that's what's happening here in Genesis 22. God's telling Abraham to kill his son and offer him as a burnt offering. In the ancient world, there were many reasons to sacrifice a child to a deity, and there were many people who did it. The Phoenicians, the inventors of the alphabet, and Israel's neighbors, even the same alphabet that the ancient Hebrew people used. Those guys, they are very famous for sacrificing their children to deities. But it was also done in Babylon. And the Greeks have some famous stories of Andromeda, and I'm probably going to pronounce her name wrong, Iphigenia. In regards to this concept of child sacrifice, Susan Ackerman discusses one of the more important Canaanite deities, which is also someone that the Phoenicians and the other Canaanites were worshiping in this area. How can the procreator god, El, she's talking about, extraordinaire He's simultaneously be the God of child sacrifice in Canaanite mythology and in Sicily and in Sardinia and in North Africa. I would suggest that he is as the progenitor or the originator par excellence. El has particular claim on anything that comes from the womb. Children are sacrificed to El because they are his. He is both the god of fertility, who gives children, and a god of child sacrifice, who demands they return. Gruesome as it may seem to us, El's association with child sacrifice is in fact integral to his nature. So this is the world in which Abraham lives. People sacrifice their children, and it's common. The reasons for child sacrifice varied. Maybe there's a terrible crisis, and the person believed that this could help catch the attention of the deity, who would then have pity on them. Or maybe it was a part of an offering that, you had to give back to what your God, in faith that he would grant you even more children or more of what you wanted. Sometimes archaeologists today believe this was also part of like a population control. Instead of abandoning children to the elements that they didn't think they could take care of, that's a practice that occurred throughout human history. It was given to the god back, so that would get something back. The child would be given back to the deity and return something back from it. Others believe it was primarily completed because someone made a vow and promised their child to the deity. Often, a child sacrifice occurred because parents wanted or needed something, and the child suffers because of the parent. Anyway. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to go back. Oops, too far. Okay. Go back. So God says, go up to a mountain. Why a mountain? Why is that important? Well, in the ancient world, any location on earth that was higher elevation was believed to be closer to where the gods lived. This is why, for example, the Acropolis in Athens is where it is, or all the high places in Jerusalem or near Jerusalem. This is actually an ancient high place that sat actually opposite the Temple Mount. And then here's the Temple Mount. It was also on a mountain. The idea is if you go up high enough, the gods can more easily step down to meet you. And it does help if you have an offering to entice the gods, something with smoke that would go up to the heavens. This is why a lot of stories speak about sacrifices occurring on mountains or hills. Okay, so given all of this background information, for Abraham, nothing really weird has happened yet in our story. Of course my deity could ask for Isaac as a sacrifice. Why not? God gave him Isaac, and God could ask for him back in the form of a sacrifice. I also want you to keep in mind that this is a test for Abraham, and I think this time he has finally studied and understands something we might forget when we read this story, but we'll get there later. There we go. We are told that in response to what God says, Abraham got up early in the morning and started to prepare to offer his son as a sacrifice. This same phrase, Abraham got up early in the morning, is also found in the previous chapter, when Abraham got up early in the morning and prepared to send Hagar and Ishmael away. This phrase implies immediate response to what God told him. I want to point out a few more details in their story. One, Abraham brings a donkey. Donkeys in the ancient Near East are a luxury, kind of like a Mercedes-Benz, a limo, or some other really nice car. People often think that horses are for the rich and donkeys are for poorer people who don't have the money to afford a horse, and all they can afford is the lowly donkey. But in the ancient world of the Middle East, a donkey is actually a nice luxury animal, but a horse is a war machine. When you think about a horse, imagine like a tank or a Hummer. But when you hear about a donkey, imagine a really nice car that generally only the very rich kings or people could afford. Abraham also takes with him 2 young men, most likely servants. The word used to describe these 2 young men is na'ar, and it's the same word that's used to describe Ishmael in the last chapter, and it's the same word that we're going to see used to describe Isaac in this chapter. Also, notice he's like his son. The author is like, he took his son. Again, we're slowing down and hearing those family words. The author uses Isaac's name, and in drawing on out our memories from our whole story so far, wait, this is Isaac. This is the kid that's supposed to be the heir of Abraham. Abraham, this is your son, the one that you're waiting for. What are you doing? Why are you planning this? Why are you going forward? The author spends time also walking us through Abraham's preparations for sacrifice. He gets up early in the morning. He prepares the donkey. He gets his servants ready. He takes his son. The text even spends the time to tell you that he split the wood. This, coupled with the extra time spent throughout the narrative on family words, really slows us down in the speed of the narrative. It could have all been said, Abraham took his son and went out to the place where God told him to go. But no, the author takes this time to slow you down to see just how much preparation Abraham went to. It's like if you're telling a story and someone in the story has like a peanut allergy, and one of the characters is going to make a sandwich for the person with the peanut allergy. So they go into the kitchen, they unwrap the bread, they get out the butter knife, they open the jar of peanut butter. It draws the listeners in because we're like, oh no, they're allergic to peanuts. In the same way, we're like, oh no, what's going to happen to Isaac? Will Abraham really offer his son? Look at all the preparations. He's really doing it. Oh no. Also, the whole time we're probably thinking, wait, like, dude, Isaac's your son. He's the one you waited for. And the author is not going to let us forget it. At every opportunity, we are reminded of the love that Abraham has for his son. Also, this might very well reflect the emotional struggle that Abraham himself went through. Man, this is my kid. Wow, I'm getting the donkey ready. Wow, the wood is already prepared, etc. Okay. Yes. And Larry got it. He's like, woof. All right. On the third day, nothing important in biblical history ever happens after 3 days, right? No. Nothing important ever happens, right? While this is just a note on distance, I think it's very interesting that God had the author include this little day count, because 3 days is actually very important to the timing of another sacrifice of another beloved son. Okay, Abraham told the two youth who were with him, stay here. And this time the youth here, like, I'm going to take the youth with me, means Isaac. And so he says, Isaac, or the youth, and I, we will go. We will worship, and we will return. Hebrew words always tell you who's doing a thing, like if the verb says I go, or you go, or he goes. So normally you don't even need to include the subjects of a verb who's going on. We can usually tell from the context of the story. If he says, you stay here, we're going. But again, the author slows down and he's like, I and the youth. We know very well who will be doing it. From then on, in the whole verse, all of these verbs are we, including we will return. Here in this moment, I think Abraham is letting us have a tiny view into his thought process behind all this. Abraham is letting the listeners know that he has faith. He believes that Isaac and him will return together, no matter what's going to happen on that mountain. After 3 days, and thinking about another beloved son, I just happened to notice something else. Okay. All right, here we go. Wasn't there another time when two young men met at the base of a mountain and they were given instructions around a donkey for a while? Just kind of another interesting parallel there. Abraham takes the wood and he lays it on his son. His son has to carry the wood for the burnt offering up a mountain. Isaac was carrying the very tools that were meant to ensure his death. Does this sound familiar to anybody? I'm hearing a lot of mm-hms. Wasn't there another son that took, here we go, hold on, let's see, did I go too far? Hold on, I have the picture. There we go. Wasn't there another son who carried wood on his back up the hill? Abraham also takes the tools of sacrifice with him in his own hand. He takes the sacrificial knife and he takes the fire. Last week, we talked about how you would put your hand on the animal and then looking into its eyes, right, that cow, you would cut its throat for sacrifice. Now, you and I might wince at this concept and shake our heads or maybe shudder. But here, Abraham's preparing to do this to his own son. And again, we notice some like unnecessary words, right? We've got, the author could have said, he put the word on the youth. But no, he says his son, Isaac. His emphasis is the son. And then he clarifies, Isaac. All right. This verse goes crazy on the personal and family words. Isaac spoke to his father, Abraham, not that we were confused, and said, my father. And he replied, here I am, my son. And Isaac said, the father and the wood are here, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? It could have said, the youth asked, look, fire and wood are here, but where's the lamb? That could have been the whole verse. But instead, the whole verse slows down in time. You have to hear the familial connection words and the names of the people involved. Isaac, the son of laughter and promise. Abraham, the father of many nations. Also, Isaac could have just said, Av, or father. Instead, he says, my father. The author here is just doing the most, going way over and above and beyond. Also, this is the second occurrence of Hineni. Abraham responds to his son in the same way he responded to God at the beginning of our story. My father. Yes? Once again, like in the beginning of the story, we see a shift in the expected direction of the story. We might think we know where the story is going. Abraham is about to sacrifice Isaac, but we actually don't know quite yet. Abraham says, Elohim Yireh Lo. Same root that we get Jehovah Jireh from. Right? Elohim Yireh Lo. Abraham says God will provide for himself the lamb. Some people think Abraham's kind of obfuscating or hiding the truth from Isaac right now. Maybe, perhaps. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone at this point that Abraham could be lying. He seems pretty good at that. Maybe he really didn't want to tell his son, oh, by the way, you're the lamb that is about to be slain. Or maybe he really did believe God would ensure that the sacrifice was taken care of. The text here is unclear, but I think as we go further on, we'll see what Abraham intended. Either way, Abraham and Isaac continue to walk on together. When they got to the place, When we got to the place God told Abraham to go, Abraham gets ready to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. Again, time slows down. We're told he built the altar, he arranged the wood, and then he put his son on the wood. We can imagine every single step that Abraham went through in preparing his son to be a sacrifice. One thing I always wonder about every time I read this is why Isaac, a young man, allows this to happen. He's a young man. Abraham's really old. He ties him up and he puts him on. I was thought a little bit. There have been scratches at least and screaming, But we're not told that he struggled. Somehow, a very old man ties him up, puts him on the altar. Isaac didn't struggle. He didn't put up a fight. Like a lamb to the slaughter, he is silent and he opened his mouth. This is an interesting detail that we can easily see from the way that the author phrased this verse. Notice again the slowing down of narrative time. I can imagine this scene so easily in my head. Abraham sends out his hand, he grabs the knife, he's going to kill his son. Everything slows down and focuses on this very intense moment. Abraham's going to do it. He's not stopping. He's going to pull that trigger. He's not turning back. He didn't argue with God. Nope. God said to do this. Here we go. But then the angel of the Lord yells at Abraham, Abraham! Abraham! The angel is very insistent, and he yells his name twice, maybe because Abraham's so intent on completing this task right now. Abraham's ready to go through this, and the angel's like, Abraham, stop right now. This is also the third time that we see the word many. Once again, it marks a transition, a shift in the direction of the story. The angel of the Lord comes down out of heaven and tells Abraham, stop, don't do anything to the kid. You passed the test. And God now knows, or rather Abraham has now shown that he will not keep his son for himself, even willing to give him back to God. This verse repeats the same formula from the beginning when God said, take your son, your only son. Now again, God uses these same tender relational words when he says, your son, your only son, you did not keep from me. By the way, a word for Abraham is this. Because he took the knife, he was going to kill his son, and the angel stopped him. Sorry. Okay. Where are we? Okay. This is a picture of by Rembrandt that shows that intense moment where the angel stops. And I really like how the angel's hand is stop, on there, and he's even dropped the sacrificial knife, and he's got his clothes just like we can imagine with you put your hand on the head of the cow, and here we go, right? It's very intense, and I really like this picture. So anyway. Look, a ram. Same as Isaac had said earlier. Look, Dad, the wood and the fire, but where is the lamb? Hine, so look, is here, just like Abraham had said. God provided a lamb. We are told that the ram was caught in a collection of plants and twigs and such. And I don't use the term thicket very often, nor do I think in the city I see them often. I got us a picture so we can see the kind of, this is what a thicket is. This is the kind of his horns would be caught in. Also, the word for caught is the same, it kind of has this idea of grabbing. So it's like the plants grabbed his horns and held him in there. They're grasping him and holding him in place. So the ram couldn't get away. Then, Abraham took the ram, or the male sheep, and offered it in the place of his son. Stephen talked about this last week as well, the substitutionary sacrifice. This ram stood in the place for Isaac. Also, by the way, in some of the places where archaeological digs, where they find that children were sacrificed, on occasion they'll find young male rams or young male lambs buried alongside in the same fashion as the children. And the belief is that some parents would take the young male sheep and they would sacrifice it in place of the child towards the deity. And somehow in also these religions, it was okay to replace something, someone, right, to sacrifice to replace the subject of a sacrifice with an animal. This is an important concept, that someone else is able to die in the place of another. And I am sure Stephen will spend quite some time next week on the topic, so I'm going to leave that to him. In response to what God is, exactly what Abraham said he would to Isaac. God is doing what Abraham said he would to Isaac. God provides a lamb. And in response, the place where this occurred is related to Jehovah Jireh. Provide. So he says, the Lord will provide. So he says, he named that place Jehovah Jireh. That's why we sing that song today. Then God again from heaven after the sacrifice of the ram. Remember back in Genesis 15 when God made his serious promise and walked through the parts of the animals? and he promised on himself. Now God is reminding Abraham of his promises, and now he applies it directly to Isaac. For the third time in our chapter, God says, your son, your only son. Then God once again affirms the full blessing that he has already told Abraham that he would receive, and he transfers. Isaac will have that, right? In Hebrew it says, I will bless you to bless, multiply you to multiply. When Hebrew uses this pattern, the author's being emphatic, like, I will really, really, really bless you, and I will really, really multiply you. God again reminds Abraham of his promises to him. Abraham's child Isaac and Isaac's children's children will be more than anyone could count. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. Here we go. Here we go. There will be more children than anyone can count, just like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. And these children, they will be victorious. They will defeat their enemies, or their enemies can't stop them. That's what it means by possessing the gate of their enemies. And then the culminating promise for which we all still wait, but fulfilled by Jesus, who was also a son, or rather a great, and so on, grandson of Abraham. In Jesus, a descendant of Abraham, all the nations of the world will be blessed. And God ends with, because you have obeyed my command. But more literally, the Hebrew phrase is, because you heard my voice, or because you listened to me. Now Abraham returns to the young men with his son, just like he said he would, and they all go home to live in Beersheba. When I was thinking about this chapter throughout the week, I kept asking God, why would you do this? This is so stressful. Why? What is the point? Then a thought occurred in my brain. How else would I know, and we know, that Abraham believed God? Right? This whole time, God, he had faith, he trusted God, but we see over and over again that Abraham does not really trust what God says. But in the previous chapter, God does trust God when he sends Ishmael away, but he still has this other heir, Isaac. So how else would it be made clear that Abraham's no longer the same he was back in chapter 11 or 12 or etc., where he's like, goodbye, wife, if he believed that God would give him Isaac now, credit is that to him. Isaac is literally standing right there. But if God says, sacrifice your son, and Abraham actually believes what God told him, that Isaac is going to be his heir, back in Genesis 21:12, and he has already seen God do the impossible, with just the fact that Isaac was born to Sarah. Sarah couldn't have children anymore, and that is nothing short of a miracle. Then what is it to trust then? No matter what happens, God will always keep his promises to Abraham. Abraham shows here that he now really truly believes God's promise, and he didn't forget them. And we're told in the New Testament that Abraham believed if he sacrificed Isaac to God, God would just resurrect Isaac, and then everything would be fine. Why did he do that? Because he trusted God's promise Isaac is going to be his heir. So because he knew, you already said Isaac's my heir. You want me to offer him as a sacrifice? Okay, I know he'll come back with me because you said Isaac will be my heir. Okay, we made it to takeaways. Oh, there we go. Oh, by the way, this is a synagogue. It's a mosaic in a synagogue from the 6th century, so around the time that Muhammad lived. And this is the story of the binding of Isaac. This is Abraham. You can see he has a knife. This is Isaac. This is the altar. You can see the fire. Here's the ram. His horns are caught in a thicket. And then these are the two young men, and you can see the donkey. And they're actually all named in Hebrew. It's like Abraham and yeah. Okay, takeaways. God works in the waiting. How do we know that Abraham believed God? How does Abraham know he actually trusts God? How does anyone know? Of course I believe in my chair. It's right here. I can see it. We of course believe in the things we see. Of course I believe God will give me a son and heir. He's right here. But now we really do see that Abraham does believe. He trusts God and that God can do the impossible because he's already seen that happen time and time again. So in the waiting, this whole waiting time, Abraham's faith was growing. God works in our waiting and in our hoping. Do you think that if Isaac had been born right after God promised good things to Abraham, that he would trusted God enough to go up to this mountain? Of course not. We see him give up his wife right after because he thinks he's going to die. He doesn't really trust the promises of God. But now, after he's seen the impossible and lived through it, Sarah has a son in her old age, and they cared for him. And now the son is a young man. And maybe even soon he'll start getting ready for marriage. Here in this point, Abraham can trust that God will keep his promises. Isaac's going to be his heir, no matter what. God rescued Abraham a bunch of times from his own dumb ideas. And now if God says something, Abraham can trust that he will actually do it. This week, in our waiting, because life is a game of waiting, we are always waiting for something. Look back on your life. How are you different now than you were in the past? Where has your faith grown or not grown? Be with God in these places and let the compassion that he showed to Abraham over and over and over throughout our story be with you and lift you up. Number 2, God provides. In this passage, once again, we're introduced to the fact that just in the right moment, God provided for the children of Abraham exactly what they needed. God didn't fail them. Instead, he supported them and he promises to do the same for us. Jesus promised God cares for the flowers and the birds, and he will also care for us. This week, consider, how has God provided for you? Are there times when you had a desperate need and God came through in a huge way? Or maybe notice this week the small ways in which God provides for you. Shade on a sunny day. Just one extra water bottle that's perfect just for you when you're thirsty. A nice DM, a text, or phone call from a friend just when you need it. Take some time in those moments and sit in them and maybe feel God's love and care in these moments. In our story today, the beloved son was also spared death at the last moment. But this isn't always the case. Jesus, God's own beloved son, died on our behalf and in our place. Jesus was like that ram for us. Abraham's son was spared, but not God the Father's. Like many others, and maybe some today, God knows the pain of losing a child because of what Jesus did for us. This week, think on what God has done for you and what God gave up for you. A quote I found this week from Ben Witherington III was especially relevant for me this week. To say God is love is to say that God is the most self-sacrificial being in the universe, and as such he was prepared to go to great lengths to set humankind right. Here in the story of Isaac and Abraham, we see a picture of what God has done for us in Christ. Spend time here this week, and also come next week to hear Stephen, because it's going to be directly connected to what we talked about today. All right, that's it. Let's sing our response song.